Hey folks, welcome back for another episode of Code Club. In the last episode, I told you about an article in the Times published by Tom Calver. This was an article talking about the kind of return on investment. It almost seems like the wrong way to put it, but the return on investment, if you will, of healthcare spending and life expectancy. And we got to this figure. Online, it is interactive where you can kind of see a tooltip pop up, but it also does just kind of weird things in what countries it shows. So I went about recreating a static version of this figure in R, and I think I did a pretty good job of recreating it. One little thing that kind of annoyed me was the difference in the size of points down here, kind of at the tail of the timeline. Anyway, I'm not going to worry about that anymore. I've already worried about it too much. I'm going to worry about what I liked and didn't like about this figure and see if we can do a better job with it in today's episode. So first of all, the United States had 3 points that fell below the x-axis. And while some commenters did make a comment about that being appropriate for the United States, that's just bad data visualization, okay? So that's one thing that I would like to clarify. A second thing that I think is the bigger problem is that this was provided online, right? Using HTML as part of a website. They already had some level of interactivity. I'm wondering, why wasn't this a GIF, right? Why wasn't there some type of animation to this figure? And what would the animation be? Well, I would have it go each frame being a different year in the timeline. As it currently is, again, those smaller points were back at 2000, the largest point being 2023. And so I can imagine having a series of frames in that GIF being each year, and that we could have each year, the current year that's being depicted by that frame, being the same size point, and it kind of moving across time with the country label right next to it. The other thing that I would like to do is to do a better job of syncing the color of the country label to the color of that fill in that plotting symbol. If we do that, then I think we can lose this year demarcation, right? And something that we might also think about or see how we can do is to preserve the previous time points, right? So if we're at 2010, that we would still have the 10 or 9 previous years, but those symbols might be a more muted color. And so you can see, like, where did Germany come from and where is it now, right? And so I want to do this as a GIF. We'll do that using a package called gganimate. And we're going to be building off the code that we used in the last episode. So if you want to get the code that I'm starting with, which again is the ending code from the last episode, you'll find a link down below in the description to that previous episode where I put up a blog post including all of the code that generated that static image. Also, there will be a link to a blog post for today's episode where I will show you all of the code that we generated and used to build out this animation. So let me start out by showing you the code that we generated in the last episode. We used tidyverse show text, which allows us to use the Roboto font from Google Fonts. We also use ggtext, which allows us to put HTML into our titles and labels, okay? And so then we had a tibble that we generated that included the names of the different countries, as well as kind of where we wanted to place them within that static plot. We then read in the data from the website using a read TSV function, and we created a couple extra variables, this year and my size. So this year would give a different color for data from 2023 versus the other years, and that way down below in ggplot in the AES, we could color the border of each of the plotting symbols according to whether or not it was 2023 or not. We also then tried to create a my size variable that changed the size of the plotting symbol. And of course, this then was mapped to the size aesthetic down in ggplot as well. Another thing that we did was that we made country into a factor so that our country data would fall in the same order as they had in the Times's version of the plot. You'll recall that by default, it will go down in alphabetical order, but we had slight differences. So of course, between Japan and Italy, we wanted to flip the order so that I believe the Italy data fell on top of the Japan data. Next, we sorted the data because the data coming in was in all sorts of weird order by country and year. And so by getting it in the correct order, we could then get everything else to be in the correct order. We then plotted it using a geom point where we used 21, which is a circle with a border, And so we made that a thin border of 0.25. Then with geom text, we added our country labels, right? And so we made the color of each of those labels gray 50. This is where I want to match the color back to my plotting symbol. We added a few annotations for just kind of garnishing. Let me bop around a little bit here to show you how I did that. So first, within the plot, we had the 2000 and the 2023 labels next to the Germany data. So that's why this color is gold here. And so we added that text with an annotation. We also then modified the X and Y axis labels by putting those labels on the axes themselves. The final garnish that I added was a red rectangle that I could put behind our white UK in the title. And so again, looking at the plot, hopefully you see these things. So going from the last to the first, here is that red rectangle behind the white UK. Here are those two axis labels. And then here are the two dates, the 2000 and 2023 next to the Germany data, to kind of show you the progression of time. I talked about the stroke around plotting symbol 21. So this year for like Italy, you'll see that black border, whereas the other years gets a white border. And of course, you can see Italy on top of Japan, and that Canada goes below France, below UK. And again, that's falling onto the palette or onto the canvas of the plot in alphabetical order. Finally, as we come down to these scales and labels and themes, a whole bunch of things that we did to make the plot look more attractive and to do a better job of matching what was in the original figure. Now we want to go back and we want to make modifications to account for the critique that I had of the figure and the things I wanted to change. First up is making sure those 3 US points do not fall below the x-axis. And so we'll come down, and this is probably in chord Cartesian with y-lim going down to 77. Let's go ahead and put that up to 76. And so then before we can run it, we have to go ahead and load all of our code. That brought those 3 points back into the canvas. Great. But now we see our x-axis label is raised up 1 year, basically, on the y-axis. So let's come back into our code where we had that annotate function, where we were putting in our life expectancy and per capita spending. And so this here now needs to go down to 76.5 rather than 77.5. And so now we get per capita spend put back down. So the next thing that I want to do is let's go ahead and get rid of the 2000 and 2023 labels that we have next to Germany. That was, again, another annotate. And so that is here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And so now that is gone. The next thing I want to do is let's go ahead and make the country label the same color as the plotting symbol. And so we had in our geom text here, we had color equals gray 50. I'll go ahead and remove that. So we see that up in the AES, we were coloring the border of the plotting symbol with this year. And so I think we're ultimately going to keep everything to have the same colored stroke. And so let's go ahead and change color to also be the same as country. And then in geom point, we can make the border of our plotting symbol black. So we'll do color equals black down here in geom point. And then I think I had a scale color manual here, and I'm going to replace this with the same values that I have for scale fill manual. We'll do scale color manual. It always amazes me when I make all these changes and I don't get any error messages. Go Pat. But it's not doing what I wanted to do, is it? Our country labels are the same, are black basically, or maybe that gray color. So that's not right. We didn't get an error message, but we didn't get the right result. So let's come back up to geom text where we had the country labels, and I see what the problem was, right? So I set my own AES here in geom text. And so color country needs to come down here into this AES for geom text. And so let's go ahead and put these over separate lines. Very good. Now we have our country name in the same color as the plotting symbol. We have also changed the border, the stroke, of all of the plotting symbols to be black, the same color and thickness that we have for the 2023 data. This is already somewhat of an improvement over what we previously had as a static image. Now we want to get ready to convert this into an animation. And so what we're going to use to make the animation is a package called gganimate. And gganimate you can think of as basically being a wrapper around a function that will make a different version of this plot for each year's worth of data. And so you can imagine saying like filter year equals 2000, make the plot. Filter year equals 2001, make a plot. Filter year equals 2002, make a plot, right? And keep doing that. And then it puts together those figures to make a GIF. And so what we're going to want to do, I think, is to make each of our plotting symbols the same size. Because as the animation goes, I don't want my plotting symbols to get bigger. I want them to be kind of the same size marching on. The other thing that we're going to want to do is for each year, each time point, we're going to want that country name to be next to our plotting symbol, okay? And so let's go ahead and change the plotting symbol to remove the size aesthetic from back up here in ggplot. So all that work we tried to do to customize the size by year, I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And maybe in here also I'll get rid of my size, and I'll also get rid of this year, cleaning up the code a bit. And so that made all of the points small. I liked that bigger size. And I think back up here, something that I had was scale size continuous going from 1 to 6. And so let's go ahead and make the size 6 because I liked that big point size. And so here we can do size equals 6. Good. So again, we're not going to see all of these points at the same time in the same size, but this is getting us set up for doing the animation. Now what we also want to do is put the country label next to each year. So back up here in geom text, we again had the country labels is what we were using, right? And so we were only putting one label using the coordinates for the very last year, right? So we're using this country labels data frame. And I think the way I generated that, if you'll recall, is that I ran a filter on the output of some of this read TSV and dplyr work, right? So I'm not so concerned about the year, the spend, or the life expectancy because these values are going to change for each year. But I am concerned about these nudges, right? And so I think generally I'm going to want my country name to be in the same position relative to the point. And that's what we're going to use that X nudge and Y nudge for. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly clean this up to get us down to these 3 columns of the country, the X nudge, and the Y nudge. All right. So it's easy enough. And so I'll load country labels. Very good. And I'm then going to take all of this pipeline, and I think I'm going to break it off here. And we'll run read TSV, and we get the country, the year, the spending per capita, and the life expectancy. Then what I want to do is go ahead and join in the country labels. And so we'll add that to the end here. So we'll do inner join, and we'll do country labels, and we'll join by the country. And so again, now what we see is that we have the country, the year, the spending level, the life expectancy, and the X nudge and the Y nudge value, right? And so we'll plot the country label using geom text, using the spending level on the X-axis and the life expectancy on the Y-axis, and then each year will have a different point, and we'll then nudge this, say to the left or right with X nudge, and top bottom with Y nudge. Let's go ahead and call this data, and then we can take data and pipe that into here. And the reason I created data as a separate object to come in here is because with geom text, we're going to use this nudge X and nudge Y, and it needs a vector of values. It can't take it from the column directly. And so here we'll go ahead and put in data, and here for nudge Y. And I think we can also perhaps get rid of this separate aesthetic, right? And so I'll remove the data there. I think this should work, although we don't need this inherit AES anymore. All right, let's see if this works. I'm actually wondering if I can combine these. And I think I can. I think I can go ahead and take label and color and plop that up here in that AES. And then I can go ahead and remove this AES function statement here. Again, just trying to simplify down the code a bit. It worked, what do you know? And so now we have our country label for each point. And of course, this looks really ugly, doesn't it? But again, don't think of it as this final static version. Think of it instead as we're going to show 1 point for each country in each frame of the GIF. One other thing that I'm noticing is that when I adjusted that y-axis to bring it down from 77 to 76, I moved my rectangle behind UK as well. So let's go ahead and quickly adjust that. And so that was an annotate function right up here. And so I'm going to see if I bump this up by a tenth. So we'll go up to 87.05, and that makes it look a lot better. All right, now we are ready to animate this figure. You excited? All right. Well, before we can animate it, we need to go ahead and do library gganimate. And we'll go ahead and load that. And then at the bottom of our pipeline, we can do transition. And there's a variety of transition functions from gganimate. And these describe how the data transitions, if you will, from each value that you're transitioning over, right? So we're going to transition over the year. So let's go ahead, and naturally we might think that we would use transition time, right? And then we'll go ahead and put year in there. This takes a few seconds to render. I'll show you this one, but in the future, I'm going to leave that off. And so now over on the right side, this doesn't look exactly like ours, but you can see how the points are moving over time, right? And I think if I scroll over, you can kind of see the US. And we can kind of see that like Canada and France, their labels kind of overlap at different time points. And so these are things that we're going to want to have to deal with. But of course, I'm going to want to deal with it in our actual GIF file. And so I'm going to go ahead and save this whole pipeline to be animation. And then we can do animate as a function on animation. And then we're going to want the width and height that we had down here for creating our PNG static file. And then we'll do units equals inches. And our resolution will be 300, which is what ggsave was. And you might recall from previous episodes, if you change the resolution, then the size of all the things changes, right? So it's important to kind of match your dimensions as well as resolution when you're going between different file formats for your images. So if we run that, then this is going to, again, generate an animation with these dimensions and this resolution using the imaging pipeline that we already made. And so now you'll see that the plot over on the right side is really blown out. And again, that's because we changed the dimensions and the resolution. And so we'll want to now save it to a GIF. We'll do anim save. I'm going to go ahead and copy this health expenditure.png, only I'm going to save it as .gif. And so now we can see our GIF, right? And this is loading the file in Google Chrome, and we can see it moving rather nicely. There's a couple things that stand out to me that I'd still want to address. So first of all, we can see that Canada and France kind of overlap with each other at different time points. And so it might be good to adjust the nudge, perhaps like add a vertical nudge to Canada and France to make sure that they don't overlap. At least the labels don't overlap at any time points. The second thing would be, I don't really know what year we're looking at, like right now, right? And so I'd like to put a label in the upper right corner here indicating the year. And then the third thing I'd still like to do is to kind of show the trailing points, to kind of see where did the UK come from at this point? Where did the US come from at this point, right? Okay, so let's start with putting the year in the upper right corner. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and add another geom text. And so let's come up here and do geom_text. So here I'm going to do an AES with my label equaling the year, right? So that's what I want to show in the upper right corner. And then we're going to modify the X and the Y to be constant values, okay? And so if we look back here, I could imagine having the data centered at like 10,085. And so on X, let's put that at 10,000 and Y to be 85. I am going to hold off on rendering this as a GIF because rendering it as a GIF, it takes a little bit of time. And so I want to do it more rapidly. And so for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and comment out the transition time and the animate and the animate save, and instead output it to the PNG. So you can see in the upper right corner now, we have the year, and it's basically been writing the year over and over on top of itself, right? And it also appears to be blue like the US. And so let's go ahead and maybe make it bigger and make it black. And so again, if we come back up to geom text, we can then do color equals black, and then let's do size equals, let's say 15, and we'll do size.unit equals pt. So I realized that I didn't put this into the Roboto font. Let's go ahead and do that, and let's also make it a bit bigger. And so we'll do family equals Roboto, and then let's again make this say 20. I can tell that this is in Roboto now. The 2 in this font has just that diagonal straight into the bottom left corner before going back over to the right. So something I see that I would like not to have happen is that the grid line we can see cutting through the number. And so I'd like to hide that grid line. And so a way that we can hide it is, instead of using geom text, let's use geom label. So again, we can replace this text with label. And there we go. We now see that we have the year, and the fill is for the US for whatever reason. We don't need to worry about that. My thought here is that by making it a label, the labels have a background color, right? They have a fill. And so this fill, if it were white, you wouldn't see that there was a fill, but it would block out the grid line, right? And so let's go ahead and turn that fill to white, and then the size of the border we can make 0 so that we don't actually see the border. So let's go ahead and do fill equals white, and let's go ahead and put these colors on a separate line. I need a comma at the end here, and there's another argument that I'm forgetting what it is. Label size is what I want. So it says size of label border in millimeters. And so I think it takes a unit. And so we'll do 0 mm. And then we need a comma at the end here. And so now what we see is, sure enough, that we get our year without a border. Let's go ahead and make it bold to see if that helps it to stand out a little bit more. It does seem, at a size of 20, it does seem pretty strong, but I'd like to make that a little bit stronger. And so we'll do font face equals bold. And I guess this probably needs to go to another line. And so there we go. I think that's a nice, strong bold. And again, we can't see the previous years underneath it because we have a white background for each of these years, right? So now that we've futzed with it, let's go ahead and animate it. And hopefully you can see the advantage of working with a static figure in this context, because each of those iterations of changing the size and the position and the bold or whatever would have taken like a minute or so to render with a GIF. So maybe we would have gotten it right the first time, but I never get things right the first time. So making a static image like this, I think, was the way to go. All right, so now let's go ahead and remove these comments, and we'll go ahead and see what the animation looks like. Very good. Now we have the year in the upper right corner showing the change in time, but that looks a little bit bonkers, doesn't it? So you recall that I talked about using transition time. And what transition time does is it interpolates between the time variable. It treats year as a time variable, right? And it made 100 frames, but we only have maybe like 21 total years worth of data here. And so it's using those 21 years and expanding it to those 100 frames. We also don't have data for 2020, 21, or 22. And so it's trying to kind of guesstimate those values. And not only is it doing it for the time, which we'll see here, right there, right? So 21, 22, but it's also moving the points through those spaces as well. So I think that would look okay for many applications, but for this application, I don't think it's great because we want it to be whole number years. So as an alternative, what we could do instead of transition time is transition manual. So transition manual will allow us to specify the frame membership direct. So as it says, no tweening of data will be made. So the tweening is the interpolation between time points. So let's go ahead and try this out. We got an error, right? And so it says end frames and FPS adjusted to match transition. And it says for image animation through the magic package, argument FPS must be a factor of 100. So I think what we'll do is add to animate, we'll do end frames equals 21, because that's how many time points we have, right? So from 2000 to 2023 minus 2020, 21, and 22, that'll get us end frames. And then we can do frames per second of 4. So basically that means we'll have 4 years per second, or that the GIF will last about 5 seconds. And so now what we see, especially that year label, is that it's going every year. And you notice it went from 2019 to 2023. Watch it here. Right, okay? And so again, by using this transition manual, we can specify what is in each frame. So I think this looks really good, and I'm happy with our labeling and that we can easily see what's happening. One thing I don't like is that this goes by kind of quickly and it's kind of hard to digest, and it gets to 23 and it goes right back to the beginning. And so I'd rather it not loop. To get to stop looping, in Animate, we can do renderer equals magic renderer, and we can then say loop equals false. And so this will then make it so that it doesn't loop. And so magic renderer is one of the renderers that we have at our disposal within Animate to make a GIF. There's another one for GIFski, and you could also use this same renderer option to give it something to make an MP4. But I'm happy with a GIF here. So if I reload it now, and it runs through the course, and it should stop at 2023, right? So it stops there. So we saw the whole progression, and then it stopped. If I want to see it again, I can refresh the page, and it will rerun the time course. Now what I want to do is I want to put in the trailing points to kind of show where each of these countries came from. gganimate has a nice function called shadow trail. And so shadow trail will show the trail of points. So it's got some arguments we'll play with. Let's see what this does before we start messing with things. So now we see it progress, right? And we're seeing all the old data, right? And so this has the makings of something that we like, right? So as we think about this, this is, of course, what the static image looked like that we were generating before, is that for the earlier time points, I don't want the label. I also would prefer the points to have a more muted presence. Perhaps we could use like an alpha to reduce the opacity of each of the points. And maybe we could also make the points a little bit smaller so they're not as pronounced as the current time point that we're showing with our time label. To do that, in Shadow Trail, we can give the different aesthetics that we want to mess with, right? So we could do like alpha equals 0.25. We could do size equals 3. So let's try this and see what that looks like. And so now what we see is that we sure enough have our points trailing, and it is more transparent. So they're kind of small points, but I think that's okay because really our focus is going to be on the current time point, right? So if we play it again, we can kind of see it go. One thing that I am seeing in there that's distracting is the country name also in a smaller font. So I think what we could do in here would be to say label equals double quotes. And so again, these are the aesthetics that are going to be applied to all of the data in the preceding time points. So I did get a warning message about combining variables of class character and numeric. So I'm not totally sure what that's about, and that it will only display this warning once every 8 hours. So I think previously you could do this in previous versions of gganimate. Let's see what it looks like anyway. And so this is good. We get rid of those country labels, and then we have the trailing points behind the big circle, right? Let's see what happens if we make it maybe size equals 4. I like that. I like the size equals 4. It's just a little bit bigger and isn't so small that, I don't know, it loses its presence. So I like that. As I replay this, I see right in here, like in the mid-2000s and early teens, Canada and France are overlapping with each other, right? And so we are using the same X nudge and Y nudge for Canada and France. So there's no Y nudge, and the X nudge I think is 500. And so I think what we could do is maybe come into some of these years and somewhat manually adjust the nudge to be different for those years where they're overlapping with each other. So I've been looking at our GIF in Chrome, which is doing the animation. A GIF is actually a series of PNG files, right? So if I kind of cycle through these, I can see basically the GIF, right? And so if I come back, let's see where the overlap is, right? So 2000, 2001, 2, 3. well, then they flip, right? So between 2000 and 2003, it might be nice to have Canada have a bit of a Y nudge. And so let's come back up to the top here. As part of the data pipeline, let's do a mutate on our Y nudge. And we'll do if else, and we'll do country equals Canada. And the year is less than or equal to 2003. So if that's true, then let's do a Y nudge of, say, 0.3. So again, currently Canada has no Y nudge, right? And so we're going to move it up 0.3 years in life expectancy, okay? Otherwise, we want Y nudge, right? And so here, I don't want Y nudge equals 0.3. I want 0.3 because these values are going to get returned to Y nudge. So let's try this. And so now we see Canada moved up, right? So that's 2003. And so now it's going to be down below. At least for 2004, it'd be nice to nudge it down a little bit, right? And so let's see how far we want to go nudging it down. So certainly through here, some of these time points, there is separation like 2014, but then the next year it's right back. So maybe through 2016, we'd like Canada to move down a smidge. So we'll repeat the same type of thing that we had done up here. And so I will copy this. And then if the year is greater than 2003 and the year is less than or equal to, let's say 2016, then I'm going to nudge down 0.3 units. So starting at 2000, again, it's up above through 2003, 2004, it's down a little bit, and then keeps going and looks pretty good. Here it's getting a little bit close to Germany. I'm kind of wondering if it might be good to have Canada only be down maybe like 0.2 and have France be up 0.2 for the same years so we can have some pretty good separation. I think also this is going to be going so quickly that people aren't going to really be noticing what's going on. So the key, though, is that we don't want the country labels to overlap with each other because then that's going to kind of look messy. So let's maybe make this, say, 0.2, and then we'll do the same type of thing, but for France. And so here we'll put in France, and I've probably got one too many commas here, or parentheses. Okay, so let's try this. Clean up the indenting. Cool. Again, starting at 2000, things look good. 2004. Oh, I bumped France down. I want it to actually be up. Oops. So let's adjust that to be plus 0.2. I don't need the plus, but it's for me. All right, so again, 2004, we see France is elevated a little bit and Canada is down below. Canada is running into France there now. Before I was worried about running into Germany. So maybe we'll move Canada down back to 0.3 and call that good. But otherwise, I think the separation looks pretty nice. Of course, there's all sorts of tweaking that we could do, but I'm going to go with negative 0.3 for Canada, and we'll call it good. Again, you could modify each year individually for each country, but that gets pretty tedious. Again, the GIF is moving by quickly enough that I don't think people are going to see small differences, right? Or small problems or inconsistencies in where the labels are. I think the key is more that when our points overlap, that our country names don't overlap. And so now as we watch the GIF, again, watching for those Canada and France labels, looks pretty good. One thing I do notice though is that earlier, the UK kind of gets lost in the trail of Canada. And I wonder if we can make our font bolded so that it doesn't get so lost, right? And so again, that was back up in Geom text. We're going to do font face equals bold. All right, so I see those faces are bolder, and I like that, right? So I think it does stand out a bit more, especially for that UK following on the Canada, which is kind of a similar color, right? It's pink versus red. But again, I like this. I really like this a lot. And again, considering that the venue for showing this image was a web page, I think it's totally reasonable to have this be a GIF, especially since the image that they had already had some interactivity towards it. Another thing that we could perhaps play with that I'll pass on for now and let you play with is I'm hitting refresh here because I want that control. It really annoys me when it just keeps cycling over and over again. There are ways to build a pause into the end of this so that it would pause and then go again, right? And it could go through, pause, and go again. On the whole, I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. I think this would actually be a far better version of the plot than what they previously had published. I wouldn't need this label in the upper right corner. Perhaps we would put back the 2000 to 2023 that they had on the original plot. I like having those previous year data being with some level of transparency and being a little bit smaller. Let me know what you think of this and what modifications you might make further to doing this. Let me know what you think about animation. Whenever I make videos with animation in them, you all don't watch them. So I'm a little bit reluctant to make those animations. I think animation is cool, but like I said, they don't always get the same level of viewership as the more traditional static images. But animation is cool. My key takeaway in building an animation is build what you want it to look like as a static image, and then use that variable, like year in our case, to pull apart those layers to show each separate version, right? So let me know what you think. Please tell your friends about all the cool visualizations we're making here on Code Club. Tell them about this animation. Maybe they'll think it's cool. And we'll see you next time for another episode of Code Club.